Hey everyone, this is your favorite Chicano in politics, and I want to welcome you to another episode of the Mess of Other Groups podcast, where we bring to you insights in California policy and politics with some of the best professionals in these spaces. Joining me today is Alexandrina Chavez,
Hi, thanks for having me.
Andrew Avila,
Hello, happy to be here.
and returning to the podcast is your Latina advocate, Carol Gonzalez.
Hi, y'all.
So, before we jump into this really big, heavy podcast, because there's so much to talk about when it comes to finances and money and the state budget related to the governor's May revise, can you all tell us a little bit more about yourselves? Alejandrina, please tell us a little bit more about your background and how you've been in the capital space inside and outside as an advocate.
I've been working in and around the Capitol for about the past 5 years. Most of it's been around healthcare, so really interested in talking about how that's been impacted by the May revise today.
Dang, thank you. Really great work, because everybody has to be healthy. And Andrew, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So I first started as a legislative staffer, and now I'm an advocate for an early learning and care organization focused on transitional kindergarten, multilingual learners, and childcare.
Perfect. Well, thank you for joining us. I know your perspectives are going to be well received by all our listeners, particularly our favorite listener, Governor Newsom. He tunes in all the time. When we look at our statistics, it says Newsom's office. So just throwing that out there. So you are being heard as advocates. But to dive in on a serious note, so we're recording this the day after Governor Newsom had released his May revise. And some top lines for all of you to know is that in January, when we first came together for our first podcast episode, we were talking about how the governor released what he called a balanced budget. However, things have drastically changed, and the administration has signaled that because of tariffs, because of strict immigration policies, and because of federal layoffs for federal workers, that has kind of changed how California's revenues have come in recent months. So as a result, in the governor's May revise, he has laid out a budget that has a $16 billion deficit, a little bit smaller than last year's deficit, but still will have some significant impacts based on how the governor laid it out. At the top of the line, I think a lot of folks have seen, that the governor has kind of laid how he's going to balance the budget differently. Some, I think, of the way he's balanced it, or quote unquote has balanced it, is similar to ways he did it last year, which is kind of shocking. But some are unfortunately unexpected ways that he is trying to solve the budget problem. So let's get into it. And I think the biggest piece in this budget is healthcare. If you can go into a little bit more, that would be great.
Yeah, when you look at the state budget this year, of the total $322 billion, the largest chunk of the budget is health and human services at about 40%, with K through 12 coming up in second and then higher ed. So a lot of the cuts we see in Medi-Cal this year, and I'd like to point out that includes IHSS providers. Specifically, the proposed Medi-Cal cuts and enrollment changes tend to be around the undocumented folks that are a part of the program. And a little background just to kind of explain why I think that's the case. Right now, Medi-Cal is funded mostly by federal money from Medicaid, except for the expansions for undocumented folks. So right now, with our Medi-Cal funding being potentially impacted by federal changes to that funding, I guess it seems that Newsom has decided that it's a good approach to cut out immigrants from that and freezing their enrollment. So it's very disappointing to see that when money gets tight, he's decided to roll back on like an over decade's worth of work and including those folks because they do contribute to the budget economically. And they contribute to so many social services that documented people are able to access, and we finally were able to fight for them to be able to access this as well through Medi-Cal. So we'll probably be seeing them having to pay for monthly premiums to continue to get these services. And they'll have eliminations to like Medi-Cal dental services and long-term care, because they have also been cut out from the from IHSS services as well, which is in-home supportive services. So it's the people that have disabilities or are so old that they need in-home care, and that's where people step in and already get paid very low wages for. So again, like just looking through the cuts to health and human services, I think we see a lot of cuts falling on the backs of working people, working families, which is kind of outrageous given that we're the state that has the most billionaires out of the entire nation. So there's other folks contributing to our economy that could have been a part of the balancing of this budget.
And just to clarify, it's really interesting that so the governor in that aspect, when he cut Medi-Cal for undocumented folks, he kept it for children. So,
Yes.
but the cut starts at age 19. So if you're 19 or older, which includes our seniors, and I think for a lot of folks, aging with dignity is something that a lot of immigrant communities have like really pushed forward in these last several years. And that was to talk about like legislative history. Seniors were the second group of individuals to receive Medi-Cal in the expansion for those that were undocumented, and to see that he is eliminating two waves of folks who are currently eligible was very, very interesting and eye-opening. But yeah, and was there other impacts on healthcare that you kind of looked at when he released his May revise that you were thinking of?
Yeah, and something that I don't think I really see kind of press picking up on is that he's put overtime caps for in-home supportive services providers, which I think is a big deal because I think in his press release he had said like, yeah, capping it at 50 hours sounds pretty reasonable. And when people like us who, like work 9 to 5 weekly, like 50 hours, it's like, yeah, that totally makes sense. But IHSS providers are people that I think make around it's like $18 an hour. And that's less than, what's affordable in California, which I think is around $28 an hour. So these people already make so much less an hour. And the people that have been able to get paid overtime are people that, well, there's two exemptions for it. There's people that, live with a relative that needs the 24-hour care. And so, if you have a kid that needs care for 24 hours, you can't find someone, right? Like you end up leaving your job and you have to take on these IHSS wages to provide for your kid and, have a home, a roof over your head. And so the overtime hours that you get from caring for them 24 hours is like really, really important to, not be homeless or, to be able to eat. So those cuts I think are really, really harsh and a bit unexpected in my opinion. Just the exclusion of immigrants is just really disappointing because California kind of likes to lead the way, and the fact that he so quickly turned back on that is so disappointing.
And I do want to kind of revisit a little bit on the IHSS workers, because a lot of these folks are really great people. You have to have a heart to care for someone else, even if they're your loved one. And even if they're not going to get paid that overtime, we know they're still going to care for them. And I know you work really closely with a lot of them. And is there any stories that come to mind when you think of a worker that has given more above and beyond on their normal 40 hours, quote unquote?
That happens a lot. Right now, there's such a demand just because our older population in the state is increasing so fast. And so the need for IHSS workers is increasing a lot, but it's really hard to get people to work in IHSS because the wages are so low and they also vary throughout the state right now. And so a lot of times people just have to do it unpaid, I guess, especially if they're in a situation where they have a family member that needs 24-hour care. And I went to a press conference today actually and heard a parent speak on how I guess she has two children that need 24-hour care and qualify for that. So she had to leave her pharmacy job to care for them, and those like overtime hours really help them keep the roof above their heads. And if that's cut, like they're not going to be able to afford their living. So it's a lot of those kinds of situations that's going to really be affected. And I'm going to be really curious to see like exactly what the stats are as people start to analyze the May revise.
Yeah, that's really important. And, uh, shout out to all the HSS workers out there that are caring for loved ones or friends, family, or just, people who they call their own patients. But there's a lot more that aside from healthcare, and childcare is absolutely another one of your expert areas that you know really well. Tell us a little bit more. Is there anything that caught your eye in childcare?
Yeah, with childcare, I know that right now the state is bargaining with the childcare union that represents all the home care providers across the state. So I know that legislatively there's not much being done. But so when it comes to the budget, we know that a lot of stuff is probably being bargained right now. But things that did end up coming out on the budget that affect childcare is that he's proposing an exemption or a suspension, of the cost of living adjustment for childcare providers for this incoming year. So even though, as we know right now, they get paid 2018 rates, so rates that the state established for them back in 2018, which is super low for people to live off of now, just given the increased cost of living. It's estimated that childcare providers get paid only 30% of what it actually costs to provide childcare. So not giving them the cost of living adjustment this year is kind of setting them even back more economically, which is kind of really terrible. And in addition to that, they're reducing the Emergency Child Care Bridge program, the funding for that. And that's a program that allows foster care children to be funded when it comes to their child care. And there's I can suspect that, this bridge program has kind of been hard to implement because it's county by county, and a lot of times counties don't know how to use the funds and haven't used all of the funds that they've been given previously because foster care children tend to move around, and so trying to keep them in the same child care with the same provider is tricky. So there's been some nuances in running that program, and my guess would be that Newsom probably saw, or the administration probably saw that there was unused funds there, so they decided to scoot those back to make up for the deficit, and then are funding it less. So it's even on the backs of childcare providers and foster care youth that this budget is being balanced, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love everything that was said. Can't add too much. I will say that although we did see continued funding for the cost of care plus supplemental payments for child care providers, like what was said, they just don't get paid enough right now, especially when you consider inflation and the rising cost of groceries and just everything else. I do want to kind of emphasize that California is the fourth largest economy in the world now.
Yeah, that's something Governor Newsom did emphasize in his press conference, right?
Yeah, and a lot of that has been built on the back of child care providers who aren't justly compensated for their work or valued. So in a way, child care providers are subsidizing the success and economic growth of the state. So yeah, it's kind of disheartening to see that child care providers are still kind of in need of being adequately compensated, particularly for like the true cost of care. We did see a commitment from the governor to continue with the alternative methodology, which is known as rate reform, and would compensate providers for the true cost of care. But there isn't much kind of specifics that would alleviate concerns from child care providers on the progress of this rate reform, which honestly has been in the works for decades. We've seen that in before in hard budget years, that especially in the Great Recession, that the childcare space saw a lot of setbacks and cuts. So I think a lot of partners in the space are kind of grateful that they haven't experienced as much negative impact as historically there has been. But there definitely is more that needs to be done in order for the child care providers to be stable and continue making California the competitive state that it is.
And I know you've done a lot of work with childcare providers, Andrew. And then so, what does this mean really to them? Like, how's the impact on what Newsom had provided in the May revise?
Um, Again, for child care providers, I think the biggest priority for them is just getting the true cost of care, and that's going to be through rate reform. So anything short of that is kind of concerning, very concerning for child care providers, and honestly, it's affecting them and their well-being. A lot of them are saying that they're feeling very anxious, stressed out. Um, Research shows that a lot of them have health problems, and a lot of it's due to them not feeling valued at work, and a lot of that is because they're just not compensated as they should. We're talking about workers who work beyond the 9 to 5 that normal traditional people do. They do extended hours and the weekends, and we all know how much we love our weekends, right? That's what we live for. And just seeing child care providers still showing up, although they're not being compensated justly, is something that we should acknowledge and address.
And the other thing I want to say about that is like very similar to IHSS workers, childcare providers, like you said, they're gonna go above and beyond. There's no clocking in, clocking out for them because if a loved one that they have or someone that they care for needs help and assistance, they're gonna be there to answer the call. And then so when we're thinking about them, we don't think of the home as a traditional workplace, but yeah, in these settings, they absolutely need to be in whether it be IHSS or whether it be childcare, and shout out to all those folks that are doing that work because they continue to go underserved, not just in current times, but historically, anyone who's been labeled a domestic worker, right? And in California, we still have a lot of domestic workers who are immigrants who come from our communities that have, this is their way of income, but mistreatment does happen in the workplace, such as low wages. But I know you do some other work around early education too. You want to give us a little bit of a breakdown in that space in the May Revise as well?
Yeah, just to quickly share, we saw some commitments to fund, supports for multilingual children, which is great. A lot of them, especially the young ones, needs a lot of support when they're in households that speak more than one language. Two languages is becoming very common nowadays, and we're starting to see kids that speak 3 to 4. So this multilingual learning should not be anything new to the state, and should be something that we should really support when it comes to our young children. Also, we saw that there was funding for 10-to-1 teacher-student ratios in TK, which is a great thing. We know that oftentimes classrooms can be really packed with children and one adult or two adults. But if we see support for teacher ratios, that just means that there's going to be better quality of instruction and child care for our little ones. And when there's higher quality, we see that in the kids' futures, especially when they enter kindergarten and first grade in the formal education space. So those are things that we're excited for.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up TK, only because I think something I noticed too was that there was a quote unquote recalibration of Prop 98, and it looks like some of the funding came out of the community college side of the formula. Not to get too nuanced, but basically Proposition 98 is the way that we fund our school systems, and so historically it's not really done like that. So I don't know if it's just me not understanding that, or if it's a technical thing or something, a maneuver per se on how the budget is being handled this year, but shout out to fully funding universal TK though, right?
Yes, yes. So that more access for families. Yeah.
It's that balance. And then I don't know how well, I guess I'll talk a little bit more about that, but I don't know if that directly impacts the community college system and like how they're going to be handling some of the decreases to their COLA. And they also were hit with a deferral. And so in practice, that looks like 2 months worth of like appropriations that the school districts would get that ends up being deferred. I know on the larger scale that UC and CSU, the governor ended up pulling the 7.95 cut down to a 3% cut. So I think that's promising to see that in the May revision, but I don't know like how hard folks will be pushing. But I know that, he praised the UC system so much during his press conference, highlighting the success of our state and the innovation that we bring. But then, we're still getting cut. Stingers up, Have y'all been seeing what Sac State's been doing, though, on campus?
No, what have they been doing?
Shaq.
Bro, they got Shaq up in there, too.
Who?
Shaquille O'Neal?
The real Shaq?
Yeah,
Bro,
he's the
are you
manager
serious
now
right
for
now?
the basketball team.
For the Stingers?
Yeah, Sac State.
Hey, I'm gonna have to call him. I thought he should have been at Dominguez Hills.
Yeah, they need support, too.
They need support. He's
Yeah.
supposed to be from LA. What happened?
Well,
He's
Sac
betraying
State's
Southern
just repping
California.
harder.
Not even.
Anyways, though, I think it's good to see that, that deferment and that cut, it's being reduced. But I think we want to go further. Why are students having to be in a position where they're going to be struggling to get their classes?
I'm just gonna do a little shout out that as much as we care about students, we also gotta care about those of young children. The ones that have infants and toddlers and trying to get their degree in higher education. That's a 2-generational approach that the state can support.
I love that.
And this is in light of the federal government proposing to remove the Child Care Means Access in School campus grant, which about last I checked, almost 40 colleges in our state receive that money. So, that's a gap that the state is going to eventually have to fill. And I think it's probably best if we kind of support that and address it now as opposed to kind of having a reactionary approach.
I appreciate that. And I feel like that brings me back to like the overlap of all of like, TK through like higher ed of the governor's master plan on career ed. I think he also brought that up a few times in his press release. And there were a handful of reductions, surprisingly, to some of the work that he's trying to lead on the career passport, credit for prior learning, the regional coordination and career education funding, which goes through the labor workforce area of the funding. All of which to say that his goal is to have this coordinating body that handles how all these agencies work together to help a student, like from when they're young to like when they're older, if they have kids, if they're traditional students, whatever that looks like. So I'm curious to see how it'll end up like being negotiated, only because that seems to be one of his priorities. But on the K-12 side, it was good. It was promising to see that the nutrition program was fully funded. The learning recovery block grants still in there. There was an increase to teacher preparation grants, which was also very promising. As folks are going through careers, that are often underpaid, as you both mentioned, in the work that you both lead, I think being a teacher right now is also not like in, because it's so expensive to get your credential. And then,
And timely.
Yeah. And then you're also expected to do a certain amount of hours without getting paid. And so it's a huge commitment. And so props to the governor's revision for expanding on that. And I guess you already mentioned the literacy and dual language stuff, but just glad to see that being included in the budget too.
And and as you're talking about, the shortage of teachers, I think we also gotta say why there's a shortage of teachers in addition to like funding and not being paid well. those kids are just like a lot of trouble. Like a lot of little kids running
These
around,
dark kids.
trying to put like sugar on your clothes, right?
iPad
Bro,
kids.
what? No.
Yeah. Hey, don't be a teacher.
Have you seen that they're exploding their Chromebooks?
Yeah, I saw that with
Ooh,
lead.
Crazy.
the teachers or the kids?
The kids.
See, yeah, I don't want anything exploded in my classroom if I was a teacher. What is it? But I will say that it's the other part too, though. Is the flip side. If you do become a teacher, you can start a nice TikTok account and see if people give you like things for your classroom and all that. Do dances with the kids and all that. I'm just saying, I'm not following
Is
any
this
of
your
them.
backup career?
This is my backup career choice. Yeah, I interned for Sharon Quirk-Silva when she was a teacher in Fullerton Elementary. That's right.
Let me see the videos.
No,
Figure it didn't happen.
there wasn't a TikTok back then, just MySpace. But going on, so the governor did. It looks like there's a lot of conversation around so the safety net and so forth. When I was reviewing the budget, one of the things that we didn't have to cut, or one things that we saw that wasn't cut this year that was cut last year was immigration legal services. However, advocates are still kind of asking for a lot more. Reason being is that with the current funding, as great as it is, we need additional dollars to provide protection and what we call affirmative legal services. That's like applications for DACA and TPS and citizenship and residency, because mass deportation is happening today. It's not happening the way it looks like at other states. And it's just that it's structured differently in California. And then so there needs to be this increase in funding. So this kind of goes into our next part of the agenda where, how did advocates respond? And immediately after the budget was released, I was with the executive director from CARES, and we hit doors talking to legislative offices saying this is our firsthand reaction to what the budget cuts mean. Clearly, we were, really upset about what was happening with healthcare, and then, but also saying, it was interesting as we were saying, like, we need additional funding for immigration legal services. It didn't fall on deaf ears. I think offices still understood that while there wasn't any cuts, the rationale for why we're asking for an increase in funding. And it's because, kind of like how Newsom's pointing out, immigrant advocates are saying, the federal government has cut us and hit us really hard. Some of the legal service providers had to close their doors in California as a result of cuts at the federal level. And California needs to step in and fill some of those places. Children are not receiving legal representation if they're unaccompanied minors because the federal government had eliminated that program. So there's a deficit. While all the organizations are still going to try to provide that, it's just a matter of resources. So that was like a first out the door. As we were telling staffers, as we were walking in talking to them, they're like, I haven't even read the May Revise. We're like, perfect. Let us tell you what it was about. And then shortly afterwards, later in the day, we were joined by other immigrant advocates at a press conference with Senator Marilena Durazo, Assemblymember Ortega, Assemblymember Banta, Assemblymember Celeste Rodriguez, and others that were there to support our efforts. And it felt really great because it was like no questions asked. This was our first response. And we were joined by several organizations representative from the Coachella Valley to the San Jose and Los Angeles. So it was really great. But what are other advocates saying around you? People that you all know? What are things around the Capitol when it comes to the May Revise? What's the reaction?
Before we jump into that, I just wanted to add to the point of like you sharing about unaccompanied minors. I saw like a news clip of like a kid, really like think of a 5 or 6 year old really just sitting there without like proper representation. I'm like, how are folks so okay with that? Sorry, I just wanted to positive like give a picture to the audience. Like that's part of like the legal services that you all are fighting for too, right? And desire to like help support our people, regardless of how young or how old they are. I feel like they deserve that.
Yeah, see, so technically in immigration proceedings, that child's supposed to represent themselves.
That's
There's
crazy.
there's
See?
no guarantee for representation. The federal program provided, it didn't guarantee them representation, but it provided them for some children to have resources for organizations. But now that's been eliminated. And we currently don't have a program in California. It had just sunsetted, so it's about making sure that that program continues. But yeah, but going back into what our advocate's saying, yeah, what are you hearing around the Capitol? What's the word on the street?
Yeah, so I again, just from an early learning and care perspective, I think a lot of partners in that space feel a little relieved that they weren't the primary chopping block this time around, like we saw in the Great Recession. And then just generally, what they feel about the May revise is it kind of feels like a placeholder a little bit, just because there's a lot of looming actions at the federal level that can really affect us. I wouldn't be surprised if our final budget looks drastically different from what we saw this week with the May revise. But all we know is that California has to continue helping and supporting vulnerable communities, because that's what the federal administration is targeting. Frankly, they're not targeting the rich and wealthy. They're targeting those that really need help, and the lowest income of us. So yeah, well, we're kind of anxious to see how this May revision will transform in the coming months.
I feel that. I mean, Planned Parenthood put out like a bold thing on their Instagram too of like, they're essentially being cut overall, and I feel like that was pretty strong. I know like my mom relied on that for like prenatal care, and I think there's this misconception that they're just about abortion services, and really it's providing those necessary supports for our community.
Yeah, I've seen a lot of general disappointment on the fact, or I know I keep saying this, but it's just like working families being affected a lot by the budget. And I have the mindset of where when we invest in like caregivers and essential workers, like that's helping people stay out of poverty. And so that's investing in the economy. So even though it's like maybe low hanging fruit for cuts for a deficit like we have right now, it's disappointing to see the lack of investment in something that can overall save the state money. Because it costs more for people to go into nursing homes, or if a working mom can't drop off their kid to childcare, then they can't work. And I feel like Newsom very much has tried to work on homelessness and affordability in the state. And so just the oversight on how much investing in essential workers and caregivers and working families can do for our state in a time where we're economically struggling a little bit, I think there's a lot of disappointment in that.
Yeah, and I feel like why not a millionaire tax, or like why is there no tax on corporations?
Yeah.
I feel like Californians, like, yeah, we're overtaxed, but at the same time, like, why aren't the big people with big pockets paying up, right? Like, they're the ones benefiting from all of us.
Yeah.
I mean, I know it's been introduced, or Alex Lee always talks about it, but I feel like there's more to that.
The other thing is like, yeah, there's taxes, but what other innovative ways is California looking to increase the investment, right? Are they trying to provide additional funding for immigrant entrepreneurs to continue to have their business, which would have a significant revenue increase if you actually invested in people who have a dream and who are going to be successful, only if they have the proper resources, right? Carol's working on something like that right now. What was some of that reaction, Carol?
Yeah, so there's a social entrepreneurs for economic development seed initiative. So the governor actually funded it over the last few budgets, and so it's actually a Latino caucus priority this year.
Hey.
Let's go! And it really is to support our like undocumented immigrant. Limited English proficiency, it's not asking about your status, but, kind of intended for those people to really help kind of get their businesses off the ground. we had a small briefing in the swing space, and it was pretty neat because we got to hear from folks who benefited from it personally and hear from their families. And someone shared how they were in Oakland and they've been broken into a few times. Their windows had been broken, and that 10K grant basically got them out of that hole because they had to replace their windows so many times. And it's something so small, but it goes so far for folks when you talk about, kind of helping their own business grow. But it goes back to the economy, right? And I think that was also something that the governor boasted about in his presentation of how strong we are and how we're protecting our small businesses. And he talked about him being an entrepreneur in his small businesses. So it's like he's done a great job over the last few years of investing in this. But how do we continue that momentum? And in our eyes, we're seeing this as a way to get us through this next administration, right? You were kind of talking about immigration and legal services, but this is something that, is potentially not going to be invested in the future if, who knows with the next governor, but you get the gist, right? Like, how can he set us up? And this could essentially be a legacy for him in a way, too, of like, hey, I've done this,
And then, going back to like how are folks responding and what investments could we make to have a prosperous California. Shout out to the folks over at Grace Institute and Child Poverty. They really came out with a very great statement. I'm not going to read, but for those that are listening, go ahead and check it out, related to the baby bond program. So the baby bond program is a program that was created for foster youth and children who lost their parents during COVID. So folks that need resources because there's not that personal safety net that they could rely on anymore. It's literally the responsibility of the state, at least in my opinion. And unfortunately, there is going to be an impact in this May revise. I don't know all the details, but it seems like there's going to be a cutting of $50 million to $100 million from the dollars. I think the statement says a little bit more for those children, and it's like if we're not investing in those kids right now or for their future, then we're really not investing in California. And so want to uplift their ask. I don't even work on those issues, but that's a population that you can't leave behind in California. But yeah, are there other things that you're hearing or other chisme around the May revise that you're all hearing?
I just wanted to share a quote. Congress may be walking away from its obligation to the poor, the elderly, and the disabled, but California will not. And so I thought that was like strong. If only we all if the whole Senate kind of carried that mentality or kind of like rallied around that. Shout out to Senator Cortese for that. I saw that in a news article on the May Revise, but
Oh.
like let's back that up though, like let's get everyone on that.
I think there's just like in the Medi-Cal space, I think similar to how Andrew assessed it, it's like kind of anticipating the federal effects of the state budget with, the proposed Trump tax cuts for the rich that he's anticipating. They're trying to balance that off a lot with Medicaid. And so just seeing how that's going through the process at the federal level and the potential impacts on the state budget, I could see how that it has impacted the way that the proposal kind of cuts into Medi-Cal.
And then, so in the process where we're at with the budget, some of you might be listening thinking it's all over. That's not the case. In fact, right now is the time for advocacy. Folks, the legislature will now respond, the Senate and the Assembly, with their own versions of their budget, and then the leadership from the Senate and Assembly will meet with the governor and negotiate the priorities of their respective bodies that they represent. And as advocates, we play a strong role in that because we inform the legislature about what we want to see in this great thing we do as called democracy, right? But the part of where we're at in the legislative process, it's not only about the budget, we're also in the legislative process. And we're in the part of the legislative process where everyone's talking about money, not only in the budget, but as it relates to legislation, because it's suspense season. When this recording comes out, we should have a suspense hearing, or maybe already had a suspense hearing in Senate and Assembly appropriations. So what is the suspense hearing? So if a bill costs the state or is analyzed to cost the state so many dollars, then they'll put it in a special file known as suspense, also known as a graveyard, depending if to some advocates. And on suspense day, after they analyze all the bills, they will release them, not based on the cost, but based on some formula that they create, or maybe there's no formula, and then they'll move on in the process. So there's different strategies to implement on how to get your bill out of suspense because they're looking at the price tag. Do you all think this year that because of the deficit we're in, have you been hearing that suspense might be a little bit different and bills might be held because of costs, like a little bit more heavy, or is it kind of the same old when it comes to suspense this year?
I feel like folks are a little more pressed this year than in the past, or at least maybe that's just like my impression. I feel like I made this like quote unquote assumption, I guess, maybe that because there are a lot of new members, they'll probably get a pass this first time where they're like, oh, yeah, like, get you out of the first house, so let the second house kill it. But I think I've kind of been noticing some members kind of like more concerned about their cost and kind of sharing that like perception, I guess. And realistically, I think in the past, the governor was like, if there's no money tied to it, like don't expect the signature. I feel like that's probably going to be the same, just given that we're in a deficit.
I've definitely heard word of that too, that if you like don't have like a funding ask with your legislation, like it's not going to be signed. I've definitely heard that too. And yeah, I've been thinking a lot about how like we have a lot of new legislators. We have a lot of new staff too that, have maybe more experience, including myself, on like good budget years. So I'm just curious on if people are really prepared for like what decisions need to be made for the budget. Yeah, I'm a little anxious. I know that legislators tend to focus more on their priorities than supporting others too. When funding is bad, so I found it a bit hard when it came to like trying to get co-sponsors and stuff and working on bills in that kind of way. Like they're like, oh, it costs money, like, maybe I'll pass or, but yeah. So it's a totally different dynamic that I have not worked in before, to be honest.
When we've been in bad times.
Yeah.
Dang, Alexa.
Yeah, and Carol said that some members are gonna get like a courtesy vote out of the suspense file. But I wouldn't be surprised if we see kind of a normal flow or slightly increased number of bills that are held. But I'd be a little more concerned going into the second House Appropriations Committee. I feel like that's where most of the bills are going to be held and die, regardless of cost, really. I feel like we can get out of this if, the federal government kind of lets go of us and stops their attacks on us. But things aren't looking pretty optimistic when it comes to, like, the whole legislative process, kind of getting it throughout the whole process. Because if your bill gets out of a suspense this year, this time around, it doesn't mean it'll have a better chance in the second house.
Wow, way to create some hope for all of us. He's like, God, just this one time.
Setting expectations.
But so, do you have a strategy then? Like, how do you make sure your bill at least gets out even at this house?
Yeah, definitely. So, again, some advocates say that the appropriations suspense file is like the least democratic process that there is. But, as advocates, what we can do is still bring this issue to the chair and the committee staff and bring our unique perspectives on why certain bills will have a unique and certain impact to our communities. And, the hot word this year has been affordability. And if you're able to show that, hey, this is affordable, if anything, this will save us costs and money in the future, that's something that really piques legislators' ears, especially when it's aligned to things that we're already doing, right? It sucks that like we can't think too out of the box right now, but it's also kind of a benefit that if you are moving a bill, that isn't too substantively different, that it would get support and move out.
Yeah, I would say too, I think I'm more familiar with the typical approach of like you start big and then you like chip away at your bill as like things get hard. So, like you want the full cost of what the bill implements, but like you're always ready to kind of start finding ways to like bring down the cost of your bill. And I feel like I did see this year where a lot of folks were being very intentional about not introducing bills that had any kind of costs tied to them, So I feel like those are the very typical approaches that we see nowadays.
What about you, Carol? How do you do you have any special strategies on how you get your bills out of approbes? Or?
Yeah, I call my besties up and I say,
Yeah, you're all, Senator Caballero. What's up, girl?
no, I wish though. If you're hearing this, please get out my bills.
You're all do pass, a roll call.
I'll take AV roll call.
Any call, as long as my bill gets good mention.
The two words you don't want to hear is your bill is held or held in committee.
Yeah, or like not being mentioned.
Yeah, I was gonna say nowadays they just don't mention the bills that have died. They're like,
Yeah,
these are
it
the
depends
bills.
on which house.
Yeah.
Don't the kids call that ghosting? So they're gonna be ghosting bills in committee. They'll be like, they don't even exist no more. That's messed up. So there's nothing else special. What I typically do, go on.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I think right now too, like if you can't avoid costs on your bill, it's making the argument on like why it's a really good investment, kind of a thing, or like, oh, like this investment saves the state, or even pointing out like, well, the state's investing in this, and like let's say the excuse is like, like workforce development, this technically is the same. Like you're telling me that you're not willing to spend a smaller amount, so it's like trying to make an argument for why your costs are essential if you just can't get out of the way of your bill costing something.
Got it. Well, yeah, I think for me, my strategies, I typically say a prayer and then I go, all right, I don't have Senator Caballero or Assemblymember Wicks' phone number, but I got God's. And so I leave it up to him and then, and then we go from there. And sometimes my bills get out. You really didn't listen to me because he held the other three. But we're talking about, the budget and appropriations, that's where we're at. I think next time we come back, we're going to be probably have just finished the budget conversation. So to close out today, I want to have you all just share some final thoughts, words that you would like to share with our listeners on whatever it may be. We'll start with Andrew.
Yeah. So what I want to share, like a kind of call to action is to continue to speak up and protect the ground that, we've gained. Just because you think something's not on the menu right now, it doesn't mean it's off the table. I think, Chris, you've said things like that before, and you're my inspiration for that. But budget shifts, the priorities evolve, and the voices of communities, the ones that are impacted, matters the most, and they really help it shaping what's next. So it's important for us to keep showing up and being vocal because what we do right now, whether it's in meetings, public comment, webinars, it really lays a foundation for what's to come. So just protect what we have.
I could probably piggyback off that. I love that you shared that because I wish we did that also at the federal level. Everyone and their mom is under attack right now. It's not just immigrants. It's not just poor people, citizens, right? Like folks are like everyone is essentially like on the chopping block at the federal level. And I feel like we as a country, as a nation, as people, we all need to wake up and fight back or do something because even red states are going to be losing out on billions of dollars. And it's like, how is everyone okay with this? I know we didn't really talk about that, but when we think about like politics, about like what our state is doing, we should also be thinking about what's happening at the federal level. Because ultimately, according to Newsom, that's why we're in a deficit too. Like the tariffs haven't been impacting us. So, larger scale conversation of fighting back too.
Yeah, I think for me, it's just like emphasizing that this is a proposal by the governor. So we still have the power to kind of stand up against it and really raise our voices. I think it's really important to organize right now and educate people. Especially when working families are being affected, they don't have the time to educate themselves on the ledge process or the budget or what's going on. Like they see news headlines, maybe at best, but so like reaching out to folks and educating them and organizing them to stand up for themselves because they don't deserve for the budget to be balanced on their paychecks is really important.
And I think that's actually a great way to think about it in the sense that it is a proposal. So there are headlines right now, like all of the media outlets had ran with, the freeze on Medi-Cal for undocumented folks because it's only going to impact those who wanted to enroll in the following year, not current enrollees. But if the legislature defends this program, then there won't be any cut, and everyone will still be able to. Or let me rephrase this. The governor said it wasn't a cut, but there wouldn't be any freeze or anti-freeze to the program. And so we have to wait really until June to see what's going on. And then, so things aren't finalized, right? Reading the headlines, it's just clickbait sometimes. We gotta wait for it. And then the last thing I'll just say, anyone listening out there, I know we have a couple of folks, aside not just Newsom, but others in the legislature that listen. Some people might roll their eyes when we walk in the doors in full force saying you can't balance the budget off of Californians the way the May revise is because we want you to really think that, historically asset limit tests that are being proposed is things that never worked and just further criminalize poor people. And if you look at the way the budget the May revise is balanced, is furthering to put people further in poverty that are already in poverty, and that's clearly just not right. So when we come and ask for more money, and not only just to protect and preserve, don't roll your eyes at us because we're actually trying to do the job that some people don't want to do because it could be as easy as, oh, well, that's just how it goes, but we're not going to let that happen, and you shouldn't let that happen with us.
I think that's a great point because a lot of times it's like very easy to cut something or a program, but then once we're in a good budget year, it costs even more to start it all up all over again. So advocating for like continued investment in things is very, very important, and also like a way of saving that I wish people thought about more.
I wish they gave that courtesy vote.
Yeah.
Right?
So thank you all for joining me. It's been a pleasure. And thank you, Mr. Newsom, and everyone else for listening.
Thanks, y'all.